The stagecoach rattled to a halt in a cloud of dust, the late afternoon sun casting long shadows across the main street of Mineral Park, Arizona Territory. The year was 1883, and Nora Zimmerman clutched her small valise with white-knuckled hands as she gazed out at what was to be her new home. After 3 weeks of grueling travel from Philadelphia, she had finally arrived exhausted, hopeful, and terrified all at once. "Last stop, Mineral Park," the driver called out, already unloading bags from the top of the coach. Nora stepped down carefully, her traveling dress the nicest one she owned now wrinkled and dusty from the journey. She was 22 years old, slender with chestnut hair pinned beneath a modest bonnet, and eyes the color of summer sage. Those eyes now took in the dusty Main Street with its wooden boardwalks, saloon, general store, and scattered buildings that made up the mining town. She had come with a promise of marriage to a man she'd never met, Harold Fleming, who had placed an advertisement back east for a bride. Their correspondence had been brief, but seemed promising enough. He owned a cattle ranch outside of town and needed a wife to help manage the household. Nora, facing spinsterhood and poverty after her father's death had left her with nothing but debts, had seen it as her only chance at a future. "You must be Miss Zimmerman," said the stagecoach station manager, tipping his hat. "Mr. Fleming said to expect you today." Nora nodded, relieved. "Yes, that's right. Is he here to meet me?" The man's expression grew uncomfortable. "Well, miss, he was supposed to be. Perhaps he's running late." "You're welcome to wait inside out of the sun." An hour passed, then 2. Nora sat on a wooden bench inside the small station, a growing sense of dread building in her stomach. When the door finally opened, she jumped to her feet eagerly, only to see a stranger, not the man whose photograph she carried in her reticule. "Miss Zimmerman." The man was tall and broad-shouldered, with a weathered face that spoke of years under the western sun. His eyes were a striking blue beneath the brim of his dust-covered hat. "I'm Yates Osborne. I ranch about 5 miles outside of town." "Mr. Osborne," she acknowledged with a polite nod, hiding her disappointment. "I'm waiting for Mr. Fleming." The cowboy shifted uncomfortably. "That's why I'm here, miss. Harold asked me to come speak with you." Something in his tone made Nora's heart sink. "Is he ill?" "No, madam, he's—" Yates Osborne removed his hat, revealing thick sandy hair that curled slightly at the ends. "The truth is, Fleming's decided not to go through with the marriage arrangement." The words struck Nora like physical blows. "I don't understand. We had an agreement. I've traveled all this way. There's been a development." "The widow Johnson, she owns the mercantile. She and Fleming have been courting these past few months. They announced their engagement last Sunday." Yates looked genuinely regretful. "He paid me to deliver this." He handed her an envelope. Inside was $50 and a hastily scrawled note. "Circumstances have changed. This should cover your return fare. My apologies." Nora stared at the money, feeling the blood drain from her face. $50. After selling everything she owned to make this journey, after leaving behind everything familiar, this man she'd never met had simply changed his mind. The station was empty now except for her and Yates, and she was grateful for that small mercy as tears threatened. "The eastbound stage doesn't come through until next Friday," Yates said quietly. "A week. A week in a town where she knew no one, with nowhere to stay and limited funds." The realization of her predicament washed over her in a cold wave. "There's a boarding house," she said, fighting to keep her voice steady. "I'll inquire about a room until then. Mrs. Hollister's place, it's full up with miners, has been for months." Yates twisted his hat in his hands, a gesture that spoke of genuine concern rather than mere awkwardness. Nora's composure finally cracked. What am I to do then? Sleep in the street? Yates stood straighter, decision firming his features. Then you'll stay with me. I beg your pardon. Nora's shock temporarily overrode her despair. I've got a ranch house with a spare room. It ain't fancy, but it's clean and it's safe. He must have seen the alarm in her face because he quickly added, My housekeeper, Mrs. Torres, lives there too. Been with me since my mother passed. Your reputation would be safe and you'd have a place to stay until you figure out your next steps. Nora hesitated. The impropriety of staying at a stranger's home battled with her desperate situation. I couldn't impose, it ain't an imposition. What Fleming did wasn't right. His jaw tightened momentarily. I've got a wagon outside. Think about it while I fetch your trunks. Left alone, Nora weighed her limited options. A week in a town with no lodgings available, with the $50 that would barely cover her return journey. She could try to find immediate work, but what? And where would she stay in the meantime? When Yates returned, she had composed herself. Mr. Osborne, I accept your offer, but only until the stage returns. I'll compensate you for the room and board. We can discuss that later. He picked up her valise. My wagon's out front. Your other luggage is already loaded. The drive to Yates Osborne's ranch took nearly an hour. Nora sat stiffly beside him on the wagon bench, taking in the rugged landscape of scrub brush, cacti, and distant mountains. The vast emptiness of it was both beautiful and terrifying to a woman accustomed to the crowded streets of Philadelphia. You have cattle? She asked, trying to focus on anything but her predicament. About 200 head. It's a modest spread, but it's mine. Worked 8 years for other men before I could buy my own land. There was quiet pride in his voice. What brought you to be a mail-order bride, if you don't mind my asking? Nora's hands tightened in her lap. My father died last year. The debts were substantial. Our home and possessions were sold to pay his creditors. I had few options. Yates nodded, not offering pity, which Nora found surprisingly comforting. Many come west for a fresh start. And now I'll be going back with nothing, she murmured, then straightened her shoulders. But I'm grateful for your kindness, Mr. Osborne. The ranch house came into view as they crested a small rise, a solidly built structure of wood and stone with a wide porch wrapping around the front. It was larger than Nora had expected, with a barn and several outbuildings nearby. A small garden plot thrived against all odds in the dry landscape, protected by a stone wall. As the wagon pulled up, a woman emerged from the house, short and round, with gray-streaked black hair and a lined face. She wore a simple dress and apron, and her dark eyes were curious as they took in Nora. Mrs. Torres, Yates called out, we have a guest who will be staying with us for a while. The woman approached, wiping her hands on her apron. The Fleming bride? She asked in accented English. Fleming showed his true colors, Yates replied. Miss Zimmerman needs lodging until the stage returns. Understanding dawned on Mrs. Torres' face, followed by sympathy and a flash of anger. That man, she muttered, then turned to Nora with a gentle smile. Come inside, miss. You must be tired from your journey. I will show you to your room. The interior of the ranch house was surprisingly comfortable, clean, well-maintained, with simple but sturdy furniture. The main room had a large fireplace, bookshelves filled with volumes that surprised Nora, and comfortable chairs. Mrs. Torres led her to a small but pleasant bedroom at the back of the house. This was Mr. Osborne's mother's room, Mrs. Torres explained. She passed 3 years ago. I keep it ready for guests, though we have few. The room held a narrow bed with a handmade quilt, a dresser with a mirror, a small writing desk, and a braided rug on the wooden floor. A window looked out toward the mountains. It's lovely, Nora said sincerely. Thank you. Dinner is at 6, Mrs. Torres said. There is water in the pitcher if you wish to freshen up. I will bring your trunks." Left alone, Nora sat on the edge of the bed, finally allowing herself a moment of complete honesty. She was stranded in an unfamiliar territory, dependent on the kindness of a stranger. Her planned future had evaporated, and she had no idea what would come next. For the first time since receiving the news, she let the tears fall. By the time she washed her face and changed into a fresh dress, Nora had regained her composure. She emerged from the bedroom to find Yates and Mrs. Torres setting the table. "Just in time," Yates said. "Mrs. Torres has outdone herself tonight." The meal was simple but delicious: roast beef, potatoes, fresh bread, and vegetables from the garden. Nora realized she hadn't eaten properly all day and found herself genuinely hungry. "Do you often take in strays, Mr. Osborne?" she asked after they'd begun eating, the corner of his mouth quirked up. "Not typically, no, but I couldn't in good conscience leave you stranded in town." "Yates has a soft heart," Mrs. Torres said with a fond glance at her employer, "though he tries to hide it." "I'm in your debt," Nora said softly. Yates shook his head. "No debt, just neighbors helping neighbors, even if you're not staying. Still, I'd like to earn my keep while I'm here. I'm handy with a needle and I can cook and clean." "Mrs. Torres handles the cooking and most household matters," Yates replied. "But I won't refuse help if you're offering. We can discuss it tomorrow. You should rest tonight." Later, lying in the unfamiliar bed, Nora stared at the ceiling, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the desert night. She had come west with such hope, however pragmatic her arrangement with Harold Fleming had been. Now, she faced the humiliation of returning east as a rejected bride with even fewer prospects than before, unless— the thought came unbidden, unless she didn't go back. The West was full of opportunities for those willing to work hard. Perhaps there was a place for her here, a way to build a life of her own choosing rather than one born of desperation. It was a frightening thought, but also strangely liberating. With that possibility echoing in her mind, Nora finally drifted into an exhausted sleep. She woke to sunlight streaming through the window and the smell of coffee. For a disorienting moment, she couldn't remember where she was. Then yesterday's events came rushing back, and she closed her eyes briefly against the renewed sting. After dressing in one of her simpler dresses, a blue calico that had seen better days but was practical for every day, where Nora made her way to the kitchen. Mrs. Torres was already there, kneading dough at the large wooden table. "Good morning, miss. Did you sleep well?" "Better than expected, thank you." Nora glanced around. "Is Mr. Osborne about? I'd like to discuss how I might help during my stay." "He's been up since before dawn, checking on a new calf. He'll be back for breakfast soon." Mrs. Torres nodded toward the coffee pot. "Help yourself. Cups are in the cupboard." Nora poured herself a cup, savoring the rich aroma. "May I help with breakfast? I'm quite capable in a kitchen." Mrs. Torres hesitated, then smiled. "You can slice the bread when it's cool and set the table." By the time Yates returned, Nora had not only set the table but also scrambled eggs and sliced fresh tomatoes from the garden. She felt better having something useful to do, some small way to repay the kindness she'd been shown. Yates entered, removing his hat and hanging it on a peg by the door. His shirt was dusty, and there was a smudge of dirt on his cheek. He looked surprised to see Nora at the stove. "Miss Zimmerman, you didn't need to cook." "I wanted to," she replied. "Good morning, Mr. Osborne," he nodded, washing his hands at the basin by the door. "The calf and mother are doing fine," he told Mrs. Torres. "That makes 15 new calves this season." They ate breakfast together, the conversation easier than it had been the night before. Yates explained more about his ranch, how he'd built it from nothing, the challenges of raising cattle in the arid landscape, his plans for expansion. "I've been thinking," Nora said when there was a lull. "I'd like to explore options for staying in the territory rather than returning east." Both Yates and Mrs. Torres looked at her with surprise. "It would be starting over either way," she continued, "and I've already come all this way." Yates considered this, then nodded slowly. "It won't be easy. This isn't Philadelphia, I'm aware, but there's nothing for me in Philadelphia either." "There might be opportunities in town," Yates said. "The school teacher left last month to get married, and the hotel sometimes needs help." "I taught briefly at a girls' school before my father's death," Nora said, hope kindling. "Do you think the town might consider me? Worth asking. I'm heading into town tomorrow for supplies. You're welcome to come along." "Thank you. I would appreciate that." Nora hesitated, then added, "In the meantime, I insist on helping around the ranch. I can't just sit idle." Mrs. Torres snorted softly. "There is never shortage of work on a ranch, miss," and so began a new routine. That first day, Nora helped Mrs. Torres with laundry, a far more arduous task than it had been in Philadelphia with servants to help. By evening, her hands were red and her back ached, but she felt a strange satisfaction in the physical labor. The next day, she accompanied Yates into Mineral Park. The town looked different in daylight, busier, more purposeful as miners, cowboys, and townspeople went about their business. Yates first took her to the general store, owned by the very widow Johnson who had stolen Harold Fleming's affections. Mrs. Johnson was a handsome woman in her 30s, blonde and buxom with a shrewd business sense evident in her well-stocked shelves. Recognition dawned in her eyes when Yates introduced Nora, followed by a flash of guilt quickly masked. "Miss Zimmerman, I've heard about your situation." "Most unfortunate," Mrs. Johnson said, her voice honey-sweet. Nora lifted her chin. "Yes, quite, but it's led to other opportunities. I understand the town is in need of a school teacher." Mrs. Johnson's eyebrows rose. "You're considering staying." "I'm exploring my options." "Well, you'd want to speak with Mayor Collins about the teaching position. His office is down the street." As they left the store, Yates glanced at Nora with newfound respect. "You handled that well. Most would have been less composed. What purpose would hysterics serve?" Nora replied, though in truth, seeing the woman who had upended her plans had been harder than she'd let on. Besides, it's hardly Mrs. Johnson's fault that Mr. Fleming proved unreliable. They found Mayor Collins in his office, a portly man with mutton-chop sideburns and an expansive manner. He listened attentively as Nora explained her qualifications and interest in the teaching position. "We've been making do with Mrs. Perkins leading lessons 3 days a week, but she's got her hands full with 7 children of her own," he said. "Term starts in 3 weeks. Could you be ready by then?" Hope surged in Nora's chest. "Absolutely. There's a small house that goes with the position. Nothing fancy, but it's yours if you take the job." He named a modest salary that would allow Nora to live simply but independently. "I accept," she said without hesitation. "Excellent. Come by next week and we'll go over the details." Outside, Nora could hardly contain her excitement. "I have a position, a home of my own." Yates smiled, the expression transforming his usually serious face. "Congratulations. Seems like Mineral Park might be getting the better end of the bargain." They completed the rest of their errands, Nora walking with a lighter step. The future that had seemed so bleak yesterday now held promise. They were loading the last of the supplies when a commotion down the street caught their attention. A man on horseback was weaving drunkenly, shouting obscenities. As he neared, Nora recognized him from the photograph she carried Harold Fleming, her intended groom. Fleming spotted them and reined his horse to a stop, nearly tumbling from the saddle. "Well, if it ain't Osborne," he slurred. "And look who's with him, my mail-order bride." Yates stepped protectively in front of Nora. Go home and sober up, Fleming. Fleming ignored him, leering at Nora. Didn't take you long to find another man, did it? Guess I made the right choice with Caroline. She's got money and a business. What do you bring to the table besides a pretty face? Nora felt her cheeks burn with humiliation and anger. Before she could respond, Yates moved forward, his voice dangerously quiet. Apologize to the lady and move along. Fleming snorted. Or what? You'll defend her honor. She ain't worth it, Osborne. Just some desperate Eastern girl looking for any man who'd have her. It happened so fast that Nora barely saw the movement. One moment Fleming was on his horse, the next he was sprawled in the dirt, Yates standing over him with fists clenched. That's not how we talk to ladies in Mineral Park, Yates said evenly. Now apologize. Fleming wiped blood from his lip, glaring up at Yates. For a moment, Nora feared he would escalate the situation, but apparently seeing the steel in Yates's eyes, he muttered, "Sorry, miss." "Get on your horse and go home," Yates said, stepping back. Fleming staggered to his feet, remounted with difficulty, and rode away, still muttering curses. The small crowd that had gathered began to disperse. Yates turned to Nora, concern etched on his features. "Are you all right?" She nodded, though her hands trembled slightly. "I'm fine, thank you." "Fleming's all talk. He won't bother you again." The drive back to the ranch was mostly quiet, Nora lost in thought. Part of her was mortified by the public scene, but another part was moved by Yates's swift defense of her honor. No one had ever stood up for her like that before. "You didn't have to do that," she said finally. "Yes, I did." Yates kept his eyes on the road ahead. "No one talks that way about a lady in my presence. Still, I appreciate it, though I hope it doesn't create problems for you in town." Yates's mouth quirked in a half-smile. "Fleming's not well liked. Most folks were probably glad to see him take a tumble." That evening at dinner, Nora shared the news about the teaching position with Mrs. Torres, who was delighted. "A teacher, very respectable, and your own house too," the housekeeper clucked approvingly. "But we will miss you here." Nora was surprised by how much that simple statement affected her. In just 2 days, she had grown comfortable in this house with these people. "I'll still be in Mineral Park," she said, "and I hope we can remain friends." Yates, who had been quietly eating, looked up at that. "Of course. We're neighbors now." The next few days fell into an easy routine. Nora helped around the ranch where she could, learning from Mrs. Torres about cooking on a wood stove, preserving food, and managing a household with limited resources. In the evenings, she often sat on the porch, watching the sunset paint the desert in hues of gold and crimson. Sometimes Yates joined her, and they would talk about books. He was surprisingly well-read for a rancher, about the East, which he had visited once as a young man, about the challenges and rewards of life in the Arizona Territory. Nora found herself looking forward to these quiet conversations more than she cared to admit. On her 4th evening at the ranch, Yates brought out a chess set. "You play?" he asked, setting it on the small table between their chairs. "My father taught me," Nora replied. "Though I haven't played in years. I'm not particularly skilled, but I enjoy the game." They began to play as the sun set, the pieces glowing golden in the fading light. Nora surprised herself by remembering more than she expected, and the game was evenly matched until a careless move cost her a bishop. "I'm rusty," she admitted with a self-deprecating smile. "You play well," Yates countered. "Better than anyone I've matched with locally." The game continued until stars began to appear in the darkening sky. When Yates finally captured her king, Nora laughed. "A fair defeat. I demand a rematch tomorrow. You'll have it." Yates's smile was warm in the lamplight now illuminating the porch. "It's nice having someone to play with." "Do you ever get lonely out here?" Nora asked impulsively. He considered the question, his expression thoughtful. "Sometimes. I have Mrs. Torres and Hands who help with the cattle. Friends in town, but it's not the same as family. No siblings, a brother back east. He's a banker in Boston. Never understood why I came west." Yates began putting away the chess pieces. "And you? Do you have family besides your late father, a cousin in Baltimore whom I barely know? My mother died when I was 12. Nora watched as he carefully placed each piece in its velvet-lined compartment. "That's a beautiful set. It was my father's, one of the few things I brought west." He closed the case. "It's getting late, we should go in." As they stood, their hands brushed accidentally, sending an unexpected jolt through Nora. She stepped back quickly, flustered by her reaction. "Good night, Mr. Osborne." "Good night, Miss Zimmerman." In her room, Nora found herself replaying the moment of contact, the strange warmth it had evoked. Yates Osborne was not what she had expected from a Western rancher. He was educated, thoughtful, and possessed a quiet strength that was both reassuring and compelling. But she reminded herself sternly that she had just escaped one potential marriage disaster. The last thing she needed was to develop feelings for another man she barely knew, especially one who had offered her shelter out of kindness, not romantic interest. Still, as she drifted off to sleep, it was Yates's face that filled her thoughts, the way his eyes crinkled when he smiled, the quiet intensity of his gaze across the chessboard, the gentleness of his hands as he moved the delicate pieces. The next morning brought news that changed everything. Mrs. Torres burst into the kitchen where Nora was making coffee, her face grim. "Bandits hit the Cooper place last night," she announced. "Stole cattle and burned the barn." Yates, who had just returned from his morning chores, swore under his breath. "Anyone hurt?" "Mr. Cooper was shot, but he'll live. The sheriff is gathering men to track the bandits. They think it's the Vasquez gang. I'll saddle up." Yates turned to Nora. "I'm sorry, but I'll have to join the posse. Vasquez has been terrorizing ranches for months. If we don't stop him, none of our holdings are safe." Nora felt a cold knot of fear. "Of course. When will you go?" "Right away. Meeting the sheriff in town in an hour." He hesitated. "I might be gone a few days. Will you be all right here with Mrs. Torres?" "We'll manage," Nora assured him, though she was more worried about his safety than her own comfort. Yates left within the hour, armed and grim-faced. Nora watched from the porch as he rode away, an inexplicable dread settling in her stomach. She had known him less than a week, yet the thought of him facing danger left her profoundly unsettled. "He will be fine," Mrs. Torres said, coming to stand beside her. "Yates knows how to take care of himself." "I'm sure he does," Nora replied, though the reassurance did little to ease her concern. The day passed slowly. Nora tried to distract herself with household tasks, but her mind kept returning to Yates and the danger he might be facing. She had seen the wanted posters in town for Vicente Vasquez, a notorious outlaw known for his brutality. That night, she barely slept, listening to every sound outside her window. The next day was no better. She and Mrs. Torres went about their duties, neither mentioning the obvious absence at the dinner table that evening. On the third day, Nora decided she needed a project to occupy her mind. "Is there anything that needs mending? Sewing has always calmed my nerves." Mrs. Torres gave her a knowing look, but produced a basket of items needing repair. "Yates never throws anything away until it falls apart completely." Nora settled on the porch with the mending, grateful for the familiar work. She was in the middle of patching a shirt when the sound of approaching horses made her look up. 3 riders were approaching the ranch, none of them Yates. Mrs. Torres came out of the house, wiping her hands on her apron, her expression wary. As the men drew closer, Nora recognized one as the sheriff from Mineral Park. The grim set of his features made her heart constrict. "Mrs. Torres, Miss Zimmerman," he greeted them, dismounting. "I'm afraid I have news." Nora stood, the shirt falling forgotten to the porch floor. "Mr. Osborne." "He's alive," the sheriff said quickly, seeing the fear in her face. "But he's been shot. We're bringing him home now. The doctor's riding with them." Relief and fresh fear warred within her. "How bad is it?" "Took a bullet in the shoulder. Lost a fair amount of blood, but Doc Simmons thinks he'll recover with proper care." Mrs. Torres was already moving, issuing orders. "I will prepare his room. Miss Zimmerman, we will need clean linens, hot water, and bandages." The next hour passed in a blur of activity. By the time the wagon bearing Yates arrived, the house was ready. Nora watched, heart in her throat, as 4 men carefully carried him inside. His face was ashen, his shirt soaked with blood. Dr. Simmons, a gray-haired man with kind eyes and capable hands, took charge immediately. "I've removed the bullet and stitched the wound, but he'll need careful monitoring for fever. The next 24 hours are critical." "I'll stay with him," Nora said without hesitation. Mrs. Torres nodded. "We will take shifts." The doctor left medicines and detailed instructions before departing, promising to return the next day. The sheriff pulled Nora aside before he left. "Miss Zimmerman, there's something you should know. The reason Osborne got shot, he was protecting Fleming." "Fleming?" Nora couldn't hide her surprise. "Harold Fleming." "Yes, madam. Fleming rode with us, though none of us much wanted him along. When we cornered Vasquez and his men, shooting started. Fleming froze up, made himself an easy target. Osborne pushed him out of the way and took the bullet meant for Fleming." Nora didn't know what to say. After Fleming's behavior in town, Yates had still risked his life to save the man. "Thought you should know what kind of man you're caring for," the sheriff said. "One of the best in the territory." After everyone had gone, Nora took the first watch at Yates's bedside. He was unconscious, his breathing shallow but steady. She bathed his face with cool water, noting the stubble on his jaw, the lines around his eyes that spoke of long days in the sun. "You have to recover," she whispered. "Too many people depend on you." Including me, she realized with startling clarity. In less than a week, this man had become important to her in ways she couldn't fully articulate. The night passed slowly. Mrs. Torres relieved her for a few hours, but Nora returned before dawn, unable to rest. She was dozing in the chair beside Yates's bed when a hoarse voice startled her awake. "Water." Nora's eyes flew open to find Yates looking at her, his gaze clear despite the evident pain in his expression. "Yes, of course." She helped him take a few sips from the glass on the bedside table. "How do you feel?" "Like I've been trampled by a bull," he managed, attempting a weak smile. "What happened after I was shot?" The sheriff said they captured Vasquez and 2 of his men. The rest escaped. Nora hesitated, then added, "He also told me you were injured saving Mr. Fleming." Yates closed his eyes briefly. "Couldn't let him get killed, no matter what I think of him. It was very brave, or very foolish." His eyes opened again, searching her face. "You look tired." "Have you been here all night?" Mrs. Torres and I took turns. "The doctor said you needed watching for fever." "Thank you." His hand moved slightly on the coverlet as if he wanted to reach for hers but lacked the strength. "I'm sorry to be such trouble." "It's no trouble," she said softly. "Now rest. You need to heal." He drifted back to sleep, and Nora sat back in the chair, feeling some of the tension leave her body. He was awake, lucid. The worst danger had likely passed. Over the next few days, Yates's condition steadily improved. The fever the doctor had feared never materialized, and by the 4th day, he was sitting up in bed, complaining about being confined to the house. "The hands can manage the cattle," Mrs. Torres scolded when he tried to get up. "You will stay in that bed until Doc Simmons says otherwise." Nora brought him books from the shelves in the main room, and in the evenings they resumed their chess games, with the board balanced on the bed between them. These quiet hours became the highlight of her days. During one such game, a week after the shooting, Yates asked the question she had been dreading. "The eastbound stage comes tomorrow, doesn't it?" Nora's hand froze above a pawn. "Yes." "Will you be on it?" She looked up, meeting his gaze. "No, I've accepted the teaching position, remember." Relief visibly crossed his features before he masked it. "Of course. I just thought with everything that's happened, you might have reconsidered. Recent events have only confirmed that Mineral Park is where I belong now." She moved her pawn, then added quietly, "Though I should probably look into moving to the teacher's house soon. I've imposed on your hospitality far longer than intended. You're not an imposition." Yates moved a knight, capturing her pawn. "In fact, I've grown accustomed to having you here. The house will seem empty when you go." The simple admission hung between them, loaded with unspoken meaning. Nora found herself unable to meet his eyes. "The school term starts in less than 2 weeks," she said. "I should begin preparations, of course." He sat back against his pillows, his expression carefully neutral. "Check." Nora forced herself to focus on the game, though her mind was a whirl of conflicting emotions. She had come to the Arizona territory to marry one man, and now found herself developing feelings for another, a man who had shown her nothing but kindness, but had never indicated any romantic interest. Or had he? The quiet conversations, the concern in his eyes when she spoke of her uncertain future, the relief when she said she wasn't leaving, were these merely the actions of a friend, or something more? The following day, Mayor Collins came to the ranch to discuss the details of Nora's teaching position. He brought the key to the teacher's house and papers for her to sign. "School starts Monday week," he reminded her. "We've got 15 students enrolled, ages 6 to 16. The schoolhouse has books and supplies, though they're a bit outdated." "I'm sure they'll be fine," Nora assured him. "When can I move into the house?" "It's ready whenever you are. Been empty since Miss Peterson left. Mrs. Hollies from the church auxiliary gave it a good cleaning last week." Yates, who had insisted on getting dressed and joining them in the main room despite his still healing wound, spoke up. "I can have one of my hands take Miss Zimmerman and her belongings to town tomorrow if that suits." "That would be perfect," Mayor Collins said. "Well, I should get back to town. Welcome aboard, Miss Zimmerman. Mineral Park is lucky to have you." After he left, Nora turned to Yates. "Thank you for arranging the transportation. It's no trouble." He was standing by the window, looking out at the landscape rather than at her. "Though Mrs. Torres will miss having another woman in the house." "Just Mrs. Torres." The words slipped out before Nora could stop them. Yates turned then, his expression unreadable. "I think you know the answer to that." The air between them suddenly felt charged with unspoken emotions. Nora took a step toward him, then stopped, unsure. "Mr. Osborne," Yates, "I don't know what to say. When I came here, I never expected." "Nor did I." He moved closer, wincing slightly as the movement pulled at his injured shoulder. "You came to marry another man. I had no right to develop feelings for you." "Feelings?" Nora's heart quickened. "Yes." His voice was low, intense. "I've tried to be honorable, to keep my distance. But the thought of you leaving, even just to move into town, it's been harder than I expected." "I've developed feelings for you too," Nora admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "But I was afraid after what happened with Mr. Fleming that I was being foolish again." Fleming was a fool who didn't recognize what was right in front of him. Yates reached out, gently touching her cheek. "I'm not making that mistake." Nora leaned into his touch, her eyes closing briefly. When she opened them, the tenderness in his gaze took her breath away. "I still have to take the teaching position," she said. "I gave my word." "I wouldn't ask you not to. You'll make an excellent teacher." His hand dropped to take hers. "But perhaps we could court properly, see where these feelings lead." "I would like that very much." Nora smiled, a weight lifting from her heart. Yates's answering smile was like the sun breaking through clouds. "Then we'll start tomorrow. I'll come to town for Sunday services, and perhaps you'll allow me to take you to dinner afterward. I'll look forward to it." That evening, as Nora packed her belongings, she marveled at how dramatically her life had changed in less than 2 weeks. She had arrived in Mineral Park expecting to become Mrs. Harold Fleming, had been devastated when that future evaporated, and now found herself embarking on a path she never could have anticipated, teaching in a frontier town and courting a man whose quiet strength and integrity had captured her heart. Mrs. Torres appeared in the doorway with freshly laundered handkerchiefs. "These are dry now." "Thank you." Nora took them, adding them to her trunk. "Mrs. Torres, may I ask you something?" "Of course." "How long have you known Mr. Osborne?" "Since he was a boy. I worked for his parents back in Texas before they died. Followed him here when he bought this ranch." Mrs. Torres sat on the edge of the bed. "He is a good man, Miss Zimmerman, the best I know." "I believe that." Nora folded a dress carefully. "It's strange how things work out, isn't it? If Mr. Fleming hadn't broken his promise, I never would have met Yates." Mrs. Torres smiled knowingly. "Sometimes what seems like disaster is actually a blessing in disguise." She patted Nora's hand. "I am happy for you both, but you should know Yates has been alone a long time. He may not always find the right words." "Words aren't always necessary," Nora replied. "His actions speak clearly enough." The next morning, one of Yates's ranch hands, a young man named Pedro, drove her to town in the wagon with her trunks. Yates himself was still too weak from his injury to make the journey, but he promised to see her the following day at church. The teacher's house was small but neat, with 2 rooms, a combination kitchen and sitting area, and a bedroom. It had a small porch at the front and a water pump in the back. Modest, but it would be the first home that was truly her own. Mayor Collins's wife came by with a basket of food and helped Nora settle in. Other townswomen followed, each bringing small welcome gifts: a jar of preserves, a potted plant, a handmade cushion for the rocking chair. By evening, the little house felt homey and welcoming. That night, sitting on her porch watching the stars come out over Mineral Park, Nora felt a contentment she hadn't known in years. Tomorrow she would see Yates, begin this new chapter in her life. Whatever came next, she would face it with hope rather than resignation. Sunday dawned clear and warm. Nora dressed carefully in her best dress, a deep green that brought out the color of her eyes, and pinned her hair up in a style that was neat but flattering. As she walked to the small church in the center of town, several people greeted her by name, welcoming her to the community. She slipped into a pew near the back, watching as others filed in. Mrs. Johnson and Harold Fleming entered together, and Nora felt a momentary twinge, not of jealousy but of gratitude. Had Fleming not rejected her, she would never have found her way to this new life, to Yates. Just as the service was about to begin, the door opened once more and Yates entered. He looked pale but determined, his left arm in a sling beneath his Sunday coat. His eyes scanned the congregation until they found Nora, and the smile that lit his face warmed her to her toes. He made his way to her pew, sliding in beside her with a quiet, "Good morning." "Should you be riding so soon?" she whispered, concerned. "Wild horses couldn't have kept me away," he replied, his hand finding hers briefly before the minister began the service. They sat side by side, singing from the same hymnal, their voices blending in the small church. It was such a simple thing, yet to Nora, it felt profound, this sharing of faith and community, this glimpse of what a future together might hold. After the service, they faced the inevitable curiosity of the townspeople. Mayor Collins made a point of introducing Nora to everyone as the new schoolteacher, but it was her arrival with Yates that drew the most speculative glances. Mrs. Johnson approached them as they were leaving the church, Fleming trailing awkwardly behind her. "Miss Zimmerman, Mr. Osborne," she greeted them with a tight smile. "I'm glad to see you recovering, Mr. Osborne. Harold has been wanting to speak with you." Fleming stepped forward, his expression uncomfortable. "Osborne, I owe you my life." Yates nodded curtly. Any man would have done the same. No, they wouldn't have, not after. Fleming's eyes flicked to Nora. "Well, you know, I behaved poorly to both of you. I want to apologize, especially to you, Miss Zimmerman. I handled things badly." Nora studied him for a moment, seeing not the villain of her personal drama but a flawed man trying to make amends. "Apology accepted, Mr. Fleming. I believe things have worked out for the best for all concerned." Relief crossed his features. "Thank you. And Osborne, if you ever need anything, anything at all, you have only to ask." After they walked away, Yates looked down at Nora with admiration. "That was gracious of you." "Life is too short for grudges," she replied. "Besides, in a town this size, we'll be seeing them regularly. Better to make peace." "You're a wise woman, Nora Zimmerman." He offered her his good arm. "Shall we get that dinner I promised you?" They walked to the hotel dining room, drawing curious glances from passers-by. Nora knew there would be talk the new schoolteacher being courted by one of the area's most eligible ranchers, but found she didn't mind. Let them talk. She was happier than she'd been in years. Over dinner, they discussed the upcoming school term, Yates's plans for the ranch, and books they both had read. The conversation flowed easily, punctuated by laughter and moments when their eyes would meet and hold, speaking without words. "I should get you home," Yates said finally. "You must have preparations for your first day of teaching." Outside, the sun was setting, painting the desert in shades of orange and purple. They walked slowly to Nora's small house, reluctant for the day to end. On her porch, Yates took her hand. "May I call on you again on Wednesday evening? I know you'll be busy with the school starting, but perhaps you could spare an hour." "I'd like that." Nora looked up at him, noting how the fading light caught the gold flecks in his blue eyes. He hesitated, then leaned down slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished. Instead, Nora lifted her face to his and their lips met in a gentle, questioning kiss. It was brief but perfect, a promise of things to come. "Good night, Nora," he said softly, stepping back. "Good night, Yates." She watched him walk away, touching her lips where his had been, a smile spreading across her face. The mail-order bride who had been turned away had found something far more precious than the security she had sought. She had found the possibility of true love, a home, and a future of her own making. The first day of school was both terrifying and exhilarating. 15 children of various ages filed into the one-room schoolhouse, eyeing their new teacher with cautious curiosity. Nora stood at the front, her heart pounding but her voice steady as she introduced herself. "Good morning. I'm Miss Zimmerman, and I'll be your teacher this term. I look forward to getting to know each of you and helping you learn." By the end of the day, she had learned all their names, assessed their varying levels of education, and begun to form a teaching plan for the diverse group. Some, like 12-year-old Sarah Williams, were eager to learn and quick to grasp new concepts. Others, like the Tucker boys, were clearly more interested in their family's ranch than in books and would require more creative engagement. The days fell into a pattern. Mornings and afternoons were filled with teaching, evenings with lesson preparations and grading. Wednesdays and Sundays were for Yates, who rode into town faithfully, his shoulder healing well enough that he no longer needed the sling. Their courtship progressed with a sweetness that surprised them both. They took walks around town, shared meals, attended community gatherings together. Sometimes they simply sat on Nora's porch, talking or reading companionably. Yates brought her books from his collection, delighted to find someone who shared his love of literature. One Wednesday evening in late October, 6 weeks after Nora had begun teaching, Yates arrived with his chess set and a basket from Mrs. Torres. "She insisted I bring you some of her empanadas," he said as Nora welcomed him in. "She worries you're not eating enough." "That's very kind of her." Nora took the basket, breathing in the delicious aroma. "Tell her they're my favorite." They ate at Nora's small table, the chess set waiting for their after-dinner game. Yates seemed preoccupied, his usual easy conversation somewhat strained. "Is everything all right?" Nora asked finally. "You seem distracted." Yates set down his fork, meeting her eyes. "I've been thinking about the future, about us." Nora's heart quickened. "Oh, these past weeks have been the happiest I can remember. Being with you, it feels right, Nora." He reached across the table, taking her hand. "I know it hasn't been long, but when you know something is right, there's no point in waiting. I love you. I want to build a life with you." The simple, heartfelt declaration brought tears to Nora's eyes. "I love you too. Then would you consider becoming my wife?" "Not right away," he added quickly. "You've just begun teaching, and I wouldn't ask you to give that up. But perhaps next summer after the school term ends." Nora didn't need time to consider. The answer was as clear as the love she saw in his eyes. "Yes, yes, I'll marry you." Yates's face transformed with joy. He rose, pulling her gently to her feet and into his arms. This kiss was different from their previous ones, deeper, a sealing of promises, a glimpse of the passion they would share as husband and wife. When they finally parted, both slightly breathless, Yates reached into his pocket and produced a small box. "This was my mother's. I had it sized for you in Tucson." Inside was a delicate gold ring with a small diamond flanked by 2 sapphires. "It's beautiful," Nora whispered as he slipped it onto her finger. The chess game was forgotten that evening as they sat close together on Nora's small sofa, planning their future. Yates would build an additional room onto the ranch house for Nora to use as a study. She would finish the school year and they would marry in June. "Will you mind living so far from town?" Yates asked. "It's a long ride to the schoolhouse each day." Nora considered this. "Actually, I've been meaning to talk to you about that. Mayor Collins mentioned that several families near your ranch have children who can't attend school because of the distance. He suggested that once we're married, I might teach those children at the ranch a few days a week." "That's a fine idea," Yates said, clearly pleased. "We could convert the old bunkhouse into a schoolroom. It's not being used now that the hands have the new quarters." They continued planning, dreaming, building their future together word by word, idea by idea. When Yates finally left that night, both were glowing with happiness. News of their engagement spread quickly through Mineral Park. The schoolteacher and the rancher made a popular pair, and congratulations poured in from all sides. Even Mrs. Johnson sent a handwritten note with a gift of fine table linens. The months passed in a blur of teaching, wedding preparations, and increasingly precious time together. Yates rode into town twice weekly now, and occasionally Nora would ride out to the ranch on Saturdays, accompanied by one of the older students for propriety's sake. Winter brought cold nights and the occasional dusting of snow to the high desert. Yates made sure Nora's small house was well stocked with firewood, and on the coldest evenings, Mrs. Torres would send warming soups and stews with him when he visited. Spring came early to the Arizona Territory, bringing wildflowers and new growth to the desert landscape. As June approached, the ranch house renovations were completed. A new bedroom with large windows facing the mountains, a study for Nora lined with bookshelves, and the old bunkhouse transformed into a bright schoolroom. The wedding was set for the third Saturday in June, after the school term ended. It would be held at the church in Mineral Park, with a celebration afterward at the ranch. Mrs. Torres took charge of the feast, enlisting help from women in town and ordering special ingredients from Tucson. The night before the wedding, Nora sat on the porch of the teacher's house for the last time, looking up at the stars. Tomorrow she would become Mrs. Yates Osborne, would leave this little house that had been her first true home, and begin a new life at the ranch. She was so lost in thought that she didn't hear footsteps approaching until a familiar voice said, "Penny for your thoughts." Nora looked up to see Yates standing at the bottom of the porch steps, hat in hand. "Isn't it bad luck to see the bride before the wedding? I couldn't stay away." He climbed the steps, joining her on the small bench. "Are you having second thoughts?" "Not one," she assured him, leaning against his shoulder. "I was just thinking about how much has changed since I arrived in Mineral Park. If someone had told me then that being rejected by my intended groom would turn out to be the best thing that ever happened to me, I never would have believed them." Yates chuckled, his arm going around her. "Fleming's loss was definitely my gain." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, watching the stars. Finally, Yates said, "I have something for you. A wedding gift." He handed her a small package wrapped in brown paper. Inside, Nora found a journal bound in soft leather, the pages creamy and blank. "For your thoughts, your dreams, your plans," Yates explained. "You mentioned once that you used to keep a journal before your father died." Tears pricked Nora's eyes at the thoughtfulness of the gift. "You remembered that. I only mentioned it once, months ago." "I remember everything you tell me," he said simply. Nora turned her face up to his, overcome with love for this man who listened, who remembered, who saw her as she truly was. "I love you, Yates Osborne. And I love you, Nora Zimmerman, soon to be Nora Osborne." Their kiss was tender, a gentle prelude to the vows they would exchange tomorrow, to the life they would build together. The wedding day dawned clear and perfect. The small church was filled with flowers and well-wishers. Mayor Collins gave the bride away, and Mrs. Torres dabbed at her eyes throughout the ceremony. Even Harold and Caroline Fleming attended, offering sincere congratulations at the reception. As they exchanged vows, Nora thought of the strange journey that had brought her to this moment, the fear and desperation that had led her to become a mail-order bride, the crushing disappointment of rejection, and then the unexpected joy of finding true love with the man who had simply said, "Then you'll stay with me." "I now pronounce you man and wife," the minister declared. "You may kiss your bride." Yates's kiss was tender yet passionate, a promise of all the days to come. When they turned to face their friends and neighbors, Nora's heart was so full she thought it might burst. The celebration at the ranch lasted well into the evening, with music and dancing under lantern light. As the last guests departed, Yates took Nora's hand and led her to the porch, where they had first played chess and begun to fall in love. "Welcome home, Mrs. Osborne," he said softly. "Home," Nora repeated, savoring the word. "I've been looking for that my entire life, and now you've found it, with me." Yates drew her close. "I promise to make you happy, to be the husband you deserve. You already are," she whispered against his lips. 5 years later, the sound of children's laughter drifted through the open windows of the ranch house. Nora looked up from the lesson plans she was preparing to see Yates in the yard. Their 3-year-old son, William, perched on his shoulders while their infant daughter, Elizabeth, slept in her cradle beside Nora's desk. Outside, a small group of children, the sons and daughters of neighboring ranchers, were gathering for their lessons. Nora now taught 3 days a week at the ranch schoolhouse, while a new teacher had taken over the town school. "Mama," William called, spotting her at the window. "Papa's going to show me the new calf after your lessons," Yates reminded him, swinging the boy down from his shoulders. "Learning comes first, right?" "Right," William agreed, though his expression suggested he'd rather be at the barn. Nora smiled, watching them together. Yates was a wonderful father, patient and loving, teaching William about the ranch while supporting Nora's insistence on education. The ranch had prospered these past 5 years. Yates had expanded his herd, added more land, and built a reputation for quality cattle. Nora's small school had grown to include 8 students, with more likely as young families continued to settle in the area. They had built a good life together, one of hard work, love, and purpose. There had been challenges, of course. The drought 2 summers ago had been difficult, and Nora's first pregnancy had been complicated. But they had faced each obstacle together, emerging stronger for it. As she watched her husband and son walk toward the schoolhouse, Nora thought again of that day in the stagecoach station when Harold Fleming had rejected her. What had seemed like the end of her hopes had actually been the beginning of a life far richer than she could have imagined. Elizabeth stirred in her cradle, and Nora gently lifted the baby, cradling her close. "Time for your father's favorite student to join the class," she murmured, kissing the downy head. She carried the baby outside into the bright Arizona sunshine, heading toward the schoolhouse where Yates was helping William wash his hands at the pump. Her husband looked up as she approached, his face lighting with the smile that still made her heart skip a beat after all these years. "Ready for another day of shaping young minds?" he asked as she joined them. "Always." Nora leaned up to kiss him briefly. "I'll see you at lunch, wouldn't miss it." He touched Elizabeth's cheek gently before heading toward the barn. "Love you both." "We love you too," Nora called after him, then turned toward the schoolhouse where her students waited. As she began the day's lessons, baby Elizabeth contentedly watching from her basket nearby, Nora felt a deep sense of gratitude. The mail-order bride who had been turned away had found not just a husband but a partner, not just a home but a purpose. And it had all begun with those simple words from a kind-hearted cowboy. "Then you'll stay with me." Life in Mineral Park had its challenges, but with Yates by her side, Nora knew they could face anything together. Their love story, which had begun in rejection and uncertainty, had blossomed into something beautiful and enduring, as vast and promising as the Arizona sky above them.